History laid the foundation.
That informs our conversation. Welcome to the classroom.
From the church to the streets, and even in the suites, and all around the world. I'm gonna keep it real in the classroom.
Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom. Fannie Lou's classroom.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Fannie Lou's Classroom. We're super excited to have you here again on this Thursday. And I know I say it every week, but we have an amazing show planned today with some wonderful guests. But, you know, I always have to start off by shouting out my amazing team that makes this happen from week to week. So we got to start with the one who makes it all possible with our audio and visuals, our sound engineer, Brooke. Give it up for Brooke. Then, of course, we have Cheryl and Shanika who do a lot of the behind-the-scenes work that gets us going, managing our guests, and just making sure we have everything ready for YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. So while I'm saying that, make sure you're telling your friends and your family, your colleagues, to like us on Instagram, like us on Facebook, and to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and make sure they hit the notification bell so they can know when we go live here in the classroom. So as we have a conversation today, one of the things, a lot has happened in this past week, last week, this week, that I think we really need to pay a lot of attention to, particularly as it relates to going into this presidential election year and really direction of the country. You know, from week to week, we have these conversations where we try to connect the dots and try to talk about the intersections of all of these issues. But I can't help but think about Duke University deciding to do away with their scholarships for Black students, though they keep their legacy clause intact. I'm thinking about the McKesson versus Doe, where the Supreme Court refused to intervene in a lawsuit that could potentially mean if you're organizing a protest, a march or a rally, if anyone in that crowd throws a rock, does anything, the organizer can be held criminally liable, which we know is just another way to skirt around folks' First Amendment right to assemble and to protest, right? Because that's going to discourage people from pulling, rallies and protests together. But we're going to do some more unpacking of what all this means as we follow what's happening in the courts with that case. And then if you have not seen, I think I brought this up in the classroom last week, I encourage everyone to go and pull the Project 2025. Mm-hmm. It is a blueprint pulled together by over 400 scholars and policy experts. And it really is Donald Trump's blueprint or plan for a transition back into leadership if he were to be elected president. And it's about 900 pages, but I think we're going to do something to really break that down and where we can understand the importance of that Project 2025 and what that means as it relates particularly to, I'm going to say, Black, brown, and poor communities. Like, what does it mean? It's a blueprint to really, I'm going to say, reshape the branches of government, but also departments, Department of Commerce, Defense, you name it. It's how they begin to do that. And that's part one of part four of their plan, right? And so I think when I think about just these recent things and then just the Afrophobia that I see going around, right? There's prejudice, discrimination, and racism against people, cultures of Africa and the Africa diaspora. It's a constant assault, right, on humanity, in my estimation. And I think we have to be very in tune to that and not turn a blind eye and not just to vote recklessly. Like, we really need to understand what's at stake, not just in our local communities, but in our states, our country, and really globally. Because this is also not separate and apart from what was going on with the genocide in Gaza, for example. And so we really have to connect all of these dots. And so our show today, for me, is just another intersection. And so we at Friendship West, we've gone to the border a few times. And we recently went a couple of months ago. These months and days and weeks run together. But we recently went again to the Texas-Mexico border, because there's still a crisis, whether the news is covering it or not. But it's also important, I think, for a lot of us, particularly those of us in the Black community, to understand why we need to be concerned about the crisis at the border, and not just be concerned, but why we also should be present in supporting those organizations that work at the border. And so I have two exceptional guests on today. One a longtime friend, another is becoming a good friend and a co-conspirator in this work. And so we want to talk about that today. And I want to lean, because I keep hearing a lot of people talk about, close the border, shut it off. It's not enough room in America. People are taking our job, like all these, what I'm calling scapegoating of people who are at the border. And we just need to have a conversation about that and really talk about what's really happening and really tell the truth, because we only get the version that the media gives us. And if you're in Texas, you're really getting a skew view, a vision of what it means, of what's happening at the border, right? Like, the criminals are the Texas government and the way in which they're handling things at the border. So let me introduce our guests. But I wanted to kind of talk about the, Duke, Project 25, McKesson versus Doe, the Afrophobia. We can go on. The list can go on and on. All these are intersections and they're connected. And I just want to kind of unpack a little bit about that today's episode. So the first guest we have today is Reverend Anyra Cano. Reverend Cano is Director of Programs and Outreach for Fellowship Southwest, a Christian network of churches and individuals who practice compassion, pursue justice, and build new connections. Originally from El Paso, Anyra earned her undergraduate degree in Biblical Theological Studies from Baptist University of the Americas and her master's degree in Global Leadership from Dallas Baptist University. She has experience working with Baptists, bless her, through positions with Buckner International Cooperative Baptist Fellowship and Advocacy Work, CBF of Texas, and Baptist University of the Americas. Before working at Fellowship Southwest, she served as the first coordinator of Texas Baptist Women in Ministry. As academic coordinator for the Christian Latina Leadership Institute and as a youth pastor of Iglesia Bautista Victoria en Cristo for 13 years. I got my Spanish on today. Anyra and her husband, Carlos Valencia, live with their 3-year-old daughter in Fort Worth, Texas. In addition to their full-time jobs, the couple serves at Iglesia Bautista Victoria en Cristo, where Carlos is the senior pastor. Let's welcome Reverend Anyra to Fannie Lou's classroom. And then we have my good friend, Stephen Reeves. Stephen Reeves serves as the Executive Director of Fellowship Southwest. Established in 2017, Fellowship Southwest is a Christian network of churches and individuals practicing compassion, pursuing justice, and building new connections. Fellowship Southwest work includes creation and support of network of ministries serving the needs of migrants on both sides of the southern border. Reeves has spent nearly 20 years serving at the intersection of faith and public policy. He is committed to educating, equipping, and encouraging Christian advocates in the public square. He has been a longtime leader in the effort to reform predatory lending practices, including payday and auto title lending, and an active advocate for immigration reform and the rights of asylum seekers. He is a co-author of The Mission of Advocacy, a toolkit for congregations published by Nurturing Faith in August 2020. He previously served in Atlanta, Georgia as Director of Advocacy for the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship and as Director of Public Policy and Legislative Counsel for Texas Baptist Christian Life Commission, where he directed the work of Citizenship and Public Policy Office in Austin and was a registered lobbyist. As a native of Austin, Texas, a member of the State Bar of Texas, a graduate of the University of Texas at Austin and Texas Tech University School of Law, before joining at CLC, he served as staff attorney for the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty in Washington, D.C. Let's welcome Stephen Reeves to the classroom.
Thank you, Danielle. It's great to be with you.
So one thing we know, we got good Baptists in the house today.
Very.
Got some good Baptists in the house today. So I'm excited about the conversation today because we have not only the two of you who do this work on the ground, but you also understand the importance of advocacy and activism. and that public policy is central, right, to our faith, and how that faith and public life must intersect. Like, it's essential to do that. So I'm excited about this conversation because I think that's what we have to keep reminding people of faith, is that we have an obligation to be engaged in these issues and to use our voice, use our platforms and our privilege, right, to speak out and speak truth to power, meaning how do we really talk about what is God's design and desire for all of God's creation, and what is the real Jesus that we preach, right? That Howard Thurman, that there are many and varied are the interpretations of the life and ministry of Jesus Christ. But very few of those have something to say about those who stand in a moment in time with their backs against the wall. And today we're talking about those whose backs are against the wall. And we have different versions, right, of people who say they're Christian, who say God is leading them, who are handling this Christ at the border in very different ways. One is death dealing and one is life giving. So we want to have a little conversation around that, kind of rooted in our faith. So I think where I want to start off first, let's just do this first, because I think that'll help us as we use terminology throughout today. Let's first break down, when people say immigrant, what does that mean? When we say migrant, what does that mean? When we say asylum seeker, what does that mean? So Stephen or Anyra can take. So maybe, okay, let's do it this way. Stephen, how about you take what's an immigrant or migrant, and Anyra, you tell us about asylum seekers.
Okay.
Sure, happy to. I think when I think of the term immigrant, I think of someone who's likely to move into a country in a permanent way. So they're moving to a destination to stay there. Migrant is a more overarching term for folks who come for different reasons, perhaps to stay in a place, or perhaps to continue moving on to another country. And so in this conversation, I have moved more and more to saying migrant, because you don't really know why someone's coming, what their final destination or intention is, and that's a bit of a more overarching term.
And for asylum seeker, it's usually a person who is coming to the country, to this country or any other country, seeking refuge for some kind of persecution happening in their country, for some kind of corruption happening in their country. They're fleeing danger. And so when we speak about asylum seekers coming to the United States, it's people seeking refuge in our country. Initially, those who come to seek refuge in our country are called asylum seekers. And if they were to if their cases were to be approved and found that they have credible reason to be in the country as refugees, their status would eventually change from asylum seekers to refugees. So in essence, they are refugees, but they haven't been given the appropriate immigration status as refugees.
And that's very helpful to even to layer that, because I think sometimes we just on the news or people say, oh, the refugees. But what you're saying is, since you're those who are seeking asylum because of some type of political persecution, et cetera, they're not refugees until they get the appropriate status to be called then a refugee, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, they haven't gone through they have not gone through the process, the immigration process, in order to be considered a refugee. And so in other countries, you'll have refugee camps. And while they're in those refugee camps, they're being processed to be able to come into the United States. They're being vetted. They're being, they're doing all the paperwork and due process in order to come to the United States. And when they come to the United States, they're considered refugees, and they receive different types of governmental help in order to be able to live in this country. And so asylum seekers who are not considered refugees yet, when they come into this country, they have absolutely no access to any kind of help from the government. They have to begin their process. So instead of beginning their process in a refugee camp, they're beginning their process here in the United States.
Okay, so let's talk about, because we recently joined you all for a trip down at the border, talk about who is at the border. That's one, right? And then to the extent that we can, right, the why. Why people are coming. So let's talk about who is at the border first. And of course, I'll chime in on that. But just
Yeah.
because you all are down there consistently, and I want to just make that note, right, that Fellowship Southwest is consistently at the border, and not just going to the border, but supporting ministries on the ground who get resources.
Yes,
And I've
ma'am.
seen it. I've seen it for myself, how resources that come through Fellowship Southwest go directly to the people on the ground. I was
Absolutely.
there and I saw it for myself. So we'll get into more like the operation of that and how that works in the partners you have. But let's talk to the folks about who is there.
Well,
Go for it, Stephen.
I'll just mention, because I asked Reverend Carlos Navarro not too long ago, in about the 4 or 5 years where this has been really a full-time ministry for him, he has served people from 31 different countries across the globe. So obviously you have a large number coming from Central and South America. We also have folks coming from Africa and Haiti and the Caribbean, but they really are coming from all over the world. When we were down there a few weeks ago, we met folks from Russia and Ukraine and Belarus and Kazakhstan. It's an incredibly wide range of folks from all over the globe.
And just depending which border town we're talking about, you'll have different types of migrants there. We've also had people from Afghanistan, people from China, who have also been at the border now, who are seeking refuge.
Yes. So, and one of the things, and of course, as you're saying, 31 countries, right? And I know we didn't see the Russians in Ukraine. I think they had already maybe left, or we just didn't get a chance to interact with them. But one of the things I always want to and what I attempt to highlight even here at Friendship West when I talk to people, because unfortunately, unless it's a denigrating image of when they showed those who phenotypically look black, was when they were on the horses with whips, right? When we saw that just horrible, dehumanizing image. But for the most part, when people hear the border, the faces of that crisis is typically going to be more of a brown facing, right? People who phenotypically more brown, like Central America, South American, unless they're from, Salvador Bahia, right? But, and I think it's important to say that there are all people there. Absolutely. And I didn't see as many this time as I did the time before I went, but it was a huge, like last time I saw Nigerians, Ghanaians, Haitian, right? That we need to know that there are all people at the border, and that
From Cameroon.
from Cameroon.
If you
right?
remember
That's
when we were
right.
there was
That's
some
right.
from Cameroon.
Right. And so I think we need to know who is there, and that we need to be concerned about all people, but we also need to talk about the ways in which even within, let me show you my terminology, right, the migrant community, right? The ways in which you still see the Afrophobia, the hierarchy, if you will. I'll stop short of calling it colorism, but certainly a hierarchy in human value and how people are treated if they're darker skinned, right? And how that is even problematic. And so I think that's why it's important for, now I'm just talking to people who are, black folks, why that's why we go. Because I think they too need to see us.
Absolutely.
Present and care, that we do care. We know you're here, right? We're not oblivious that you too are, making a treacherous pathway to get to the border for whatever, like you said, Stephen, we don't just say migrant because you don't know why people are here until you talk to them and hear their story, which we were able to do some of that, right? And so that's why I want to have this conversation, because oftentimes I think those voices and faces are invisibilized because of just discrimination and racism. And I can just say this, even when we were there this last time, that I did witness something personally, and I was just like, it's subtle, right? It's almost like microaggressions that black folks deal with in corporate America oftentimes. And it was we were at the camp with the children, and, they were just having a great time playing, right? And you remember the little, I don't know if he was Haitian, but he was certainly, of African descent, the young the young boy who was dancing out of his shoes, the baby, right?
Yes.
Who was having a good time. And so someone was taking a photo of two young girls who, I don't know, they were definitely, Latin descent, right? You could tell they maybe were from Central America, right? More brown. And they were taking their pictures and asking them to smile. And so the picture was taken, and the little black boy was just jumping around. He jumps in, right, to take the picture too, and the person put the camera away, right? And I can only hope that that young age, that doesn't stick somewhere in his memory, right? And I'm saying that to say that's why it's so important, I think, for us to be there, to really, be able to show that we understand you're here. We recognize your humanity, even if you may be getting some pieces. I'm sure there's people there who love on them too. I'm not saying that, but I am saying it exists, right?
Absolutely.
So that's why I want to talk about the who is there, so people are clear about. Okay, no, everyone is there from everywhere, right? And we haven't begun to talk about why they're there. And we know sometimes they're there because when we mean America, has meddled in the business and completely decimated economies, right? And social structures and infrastructure. So, they create dangerous, and you all can talk about some of that more specifically, because I want people to kind of understand. We say, people are literally risking, like the Darien Pass. I want you to talk about that, because I think people need to understand, for people to get to the border, you have to understand something was drastically terrible. They'd rather risk dying trying to get here than staying where they are. And nobody wants to just pick up and leave everything that's holy and sacred behind. Yes. Maybe where your mom is buried, your dad is buried, to leave that, never to maybe see that again. So now let's kind of talk about, who's there. But let's talk a little bit about what we do and about how people get to the border. What drives them to the border, and then maybe Stephen, you could talk about some of the things that drive people to the border. And Anyra, I want you to talk about like some of the treacherous pathways people take, because everybody doesn't come in on a plane, right? People come different ways. So we saw that as they were being released out of U.S. Customs, right? So let's first talk about that. Let's first talk about why people are migrating around the globe, right? What's causing that? And then Anyra, I want you to talk about that treacherous, dangerous path, and so people can really understand what that means. Yeah. So Stephen, maybe you can start there.
Yeah, happy to start. And I think that what you just said is really important, that we need to know that we are in a period of incredible global migration. It's not just happening here at our southern border, it's happening all over the world. And there are usually a handful of factors that really promote that. Obviously, violence and war drives people from their homeland. And then oftentimes famine and economy. And sometimes I think a case can be made that climate change is really driving a lot of that. If suddenly you used to have 2 growing seasons and now you only have 1, conditions change due to that. And so I think that's driving a lot of folks too. In general, I think of people as either sort of fleeing the violence and persecution, the type of things that get you on the asylum list because of your race or nationality or religion, particular social group, that sort of thing, or it's you cannot survive economically in that. And what you said is so important, Danielle, that I think in general, a lot of Americans have a hard time putting themselves in the shoes of someone who would make that decision. That what would it take to pick up your toddler and walk across a continent? This is not, someone who wants $4 more an hour. This is incredibly dramatic and drastic situations that are driving folks. And I think we have to understand that the type of trauma that they go through along the journey, as well as what the type of violence that drove them. Almost everyone we've talked to, it's either the cartel in their country rules their country and they've already lost family members and have that they have the choice to make whether they will be killed next or leave, or they're in places like Venezuela, where I talked to a young man who said, I can make $10 a month and a carton of eggs costs $6. So it is, it's you're virtually left with almost no choice for so many of them.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Stephen. Thank you again for having us here. And the road to come to the American dream, quote unquote, is a very dangerous one. One that people are risking their lives. They're putting all of their lives in believing that if they come here, they're going to be okay. So many of, I'll just speak specifically maybe about Haitians, but then some of the journey is similar for everyone else. But people go to, have gone to Brazil, they've gone to Chile, they've been there for a few years, and now they're having to face some of the racism and rhetoric that is taught here in the United States, and it's pushing them outside of those countries and having to make their ways to back north, and they go through the what we call the Darien Gap. It's a jungle that is between Colombia and Panama. And it's a very dangerous journey when, just think about jungle and that in itself is dangerous. So families are having to crawl themselves out of the jungle, literally crawl. Some meet people who don't have the best intentions, who do make their journey even more difficult. You have people who are having to fight off cartels or others who are trying to get them to go a different route, but then somebody can get killed because of that, or boat rides that help them get through some of the waters there, and leave them stranded and die. And many of them, when they do make it to the Darien Gap, the Darien Gap isn't the only dangerous place. And if you can just look up TikTok, the
Yes.
Darien Gap, and you can see the horrific stories and journeys that people are taking. They're not coming just because they think there's an opportunity. They're coming because their lives are at risk and are willing to put their lives at an even higher risk
Right.
for an opportunity of life. And so then when a lot of people say, no, when you made it out of the Darien Gap, that's not the worst part. The worst part is when you get to Mexico, unfortunately. And because in Mexico's, there's so many, it's so driven by cartels that that's really the most dangerous part, because there's so much corruption, both in immigration and with the police, and that it's so corrupt and merged the life of cartels within the anybody could help migrants, that it's difficult for them to know who can they go to. And so when they're being kidnapped by cartels, they're being raped by cartels, their lives are being taken by cartels. You can't even, there's a train that people ride on to be able to get further. And in order to get on that train, which people lose their lives on this train, people have lost limbs on this train. In order to get on that train, you have to have permission from the cartel. You have to have paid something from the cartel. And if you don't, they'll kill you. They'll kill you, or your life is in lots of trouble. And so they make their way through Mexico to get to the border, because at any border town, there are specific border towns that they can go to in order to get on per se a waiting list with the CBP, which is the Custom and Border Patrol app, where they need to get to the border, and they have an app where they can apply per se to be on a waiting list to go to the port of entry in order to come into the United States and receive authorization to come in and to begin their asylum cases. And so when they're on the border, they're also very vulnerable to cartels. In order for many of them, if they don't find a shelter to stay at, they have to be on the streets, and they're prey for cartels who don't have any good intentions for them. And so we give thanks to God for ministries and organizations and nonprofits who do open up their doors for migrants to be able to be housed with them. And then we also have other dangers other than like the cartel. You have the dangers of not having access while they're waiting there to health care. If somebody is sick, they don't have access to be able to seek a doctor, especially migrants who are of color. They haven't had the best migrants who are black. They are discriminated. Those are the stories that we've heard from them personally, that they don't have as much access as other Spanish-speaking migrants. And then you also have the dangers of for those who want to pass on come unauthorized by the river, the dangers that our own Texas government puts in the river, and putting buoys in the river, putting barbed wires in the river. And so there's continual danger for them. And I really appreciated something you said earlier about the importance of having churches like yours, black churches, who go down there and people can see you, because I think about the other dangers they're going to face when they come to the United States.
Right.
And the dangers of, no one knows if they're migrants. No one knows if they're from a different country. They just see them black. And we all know what that implies.
Right.
In the racism they will face and they will encounter, and they don't speak English, which makes them even more vulnerable to danger. And so even when they come to the United States, there is still more danger for them.
Yeah, man, so much, So let me go back to, and I think that's what's important. So thank you, Stephen, for and that's why I said it's a global migration. It's it's a global phenomenon happening for all kind of reasons. And that's why we can't just say, oh, you're coming from this country, you're this, because I didn't know this until, I know Black folk are everywhere. So I know wherever you go on this planet, you're going to find us we're going to be there, right? But I never just connected that a lot of the Black migrants that come didn't necessarily come directly from their
Right.
country of origin. They, like you all told us, a lot of the Haitian migrants who have made their way to the border, they were in Brazil building the stadium for the World Cup. Like they moved there to work.
Right.
Yes. And in Chile as well, to
right.
work, where they were accepted at a time and now they're not being accepted and having to move out.
Right. So I think that, and I think it helps shape, it gives a different narrative, a different meta narrative that, because of course, the former president who would just say they're all this, and this, right? No, these are people who are working, trying to make a living, raise a family, just like we are, right? And so when you say Central America, that could also mean Black folks, right?
Absolutely.
Even when
And
we
South
say that, because I
Americans.
know, right? So I know when I was helping sign in at the Welcome Center.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like one of the Haitian mothers, like she was from Haiti, but two of the kids were Brazilian,
Born in Chile.
born in Chile. So that's their nationality. They're not Haitian, they're Chilean, right? And I was like, so also to you, Stephen, not what it means to pick up your toddler, but what it means to make that trek pregnant. Because
Yeah.
the first time we went, Cheryl went on maybe the second trip I took to her. Cheryl went with us, and we met a Black Haitian woman who at that point was maybe 7 or 8 months pregnant.
Yes.
But she was, I'm like, you even made it, but had not seen, to your point, Anyra, they were trying to get her sonogram that day. Because she had not obviously seen anyone trying to make it. And what I'm saying, what you all hear Stephen and Anyra saying is not just, a narrative, is real. Like I saw the lady the lady asked about the leg, who had the amputated leg.
Yes.
That she lost it trying to get on the
Get
train.
on the train. That's right.
So it's real. Like these are real people. These are real human beings. And I think that's why it's important, the work that you all do, who you support, and even trying to have these conversations, that we humanize this issue.
Yes.
Absolutely.
That we don't allow it to be rhetoric on the news.
Right.
And you see a group of people and you're labeling them because of how they look.
Yes.
Because we deal with that already here in America. Black folk do, right?
Right.
And so that's why I'm like, I wanted you all to come and just tell these stories. Because now I want to shift to more of the storytelling, because I think that's important. Then I want to move to policy and laws, right? Because it also, because this is a structural problem we have, in addition to what I'm going to call just some spiritual decay that we have in this country, that we don't see the humanity in other people. But let's talk about, some of the ministries are doing good work on the ground right there at the border towns.
Yeah. Stephen, do you want to get started?
Please do.
Stephen's
pass
the
the
one
bar
that
rolling.
Stephen's been working with them longer, and
Yeah.
so Stephen, you want to get started?
Sure, happy to. This is just such a honor and a privilege and a blessing to be in a position at Fellowship Southwest to support folks who have, because of how they read Scripture, because of what they hear Christ saying, to welcome the stranger and love your neighbor, have entirely upended their churches and their lives, their ministry, to serve the folks that are coming. And it's, I sometimes feel like a little baby Christian when I'm down there seeing what these folks have done. And so then we get to tell these stories and say, hey, church in the U.S., if you care, here's some people here. We can make sure that your care, your support gets right to these folks who have done this. And so you were able to meet several folks down there not too long ago. Pastor Carlos Navarro is a great example. He's the one who's really mostly in the U.S. He has this incredible ministry of welcome. He's Guatemalan originally, but he's been in Brownsville for like 30 years. And his conviction is that his first night in America was the worst night of his life. And he wants to make sure that doesn't happen to anybody else. And so he's just an incredible welcoming presence there, and that someone who is a very spirit-led person who wants to introduce folks to faith and faith in Christ, and also follow them to where they end up, to make sure they get connected to a church and that sort of thing. And so Carlos is amazing. You met Edre Rodriguez, who has a heart for the Haitian people.
Yeah.
A Mexican pastor who's learned some Creole,
Right.
who's investing in these lives and helping to organize the Haitian church in shelters and in Reynosa and in places where they live, so they can have that experience while they wait on an opportunity to present themselves for asylum. Alma Ruth is a Mexican missionary there who I call her the she's sort of a mystic, a refugee camp chaplain who looks for the most vulnerable in these refugee camps and makes sure they get support. And so we've got some other folks, Pastor Israel Rodriguez in Piedras Negras, which is across from Eagle Pass, which you've probably seen a lot on the news about Eagle Pass and kind of the militarization of the border by the state there.
Yes.
He's got 2 shelters. We have Rosalio Sosa in Juarez, El Paso, but also way out in the desert in some places that are very, very treacherous. He has a shelter we support. And then finally, Juvenal Gonzalez in Tijuana, which is, all the way out there in California, doing incredible work. He has a Iglesia Bautista de la Calle, Baptist Church of the Street, and he literally feeds hundreds of people in the street and sometimes brings them into his home. And so we're fortunate to be connected to these folks and giving them the opportunity to do what they feel called to do.
Yeah.
And so it's not me going down there. It's not sending a missionary. I'm not the expert. I don't see how things change so often on the border, but we take folks who are already in and of the community and enable them to do what they feel called to do. And honestly, it's an honor and blessing to be able to do it.
And I think Fellowship Southwest for me would be the poster child for what it means to be co-conspirators with people, right? Because you're not trying to take up space.
Amen.
You're sharing your power, right? You're saying, you do it, let me support you in the way that you all show up. And for you to be a white man, Stephen, to do the work the way you do it, I think is an example, right? You come in, you're like, hey, I know I don't need to. Hey, you do it, and I see you, and I've known you forever. So, this is our second time around with the immigration, with the migrant crisis. But I want to speak to 2 things that you mentioned, because I think this is for those who watch this later or watch it now. If they're Christian and they belong to a faith community, Pastor Navarro. You just have to meet him for yourself, really. But but let me tell you what I loved about his ministry. And this is what I mean by, and I'm glad you gave his backstory that he's, when he came, the worst night of his life was his first night here, right? And you can see that in the way he welcomes. So if you go to one of his worship services, we were able to experience one of the worship services. Wherever country you're from, he's going to call you, not only call you up and have your country flag, he's going to know a song from your country. Oh, wow. He's going to know people from your country. Food. So he's very intentional, right? And we seen it the whole time we were there. Off the cuff, right? And I don't care if they were Haitian, whatever, right? He knew how to, you could tell his things, I'm going to connect with you. And you could see the people, some begin to cry. Yeah. Some begin to just fall down in prayer. And because that's definitely his ministry. He gives them their flag. He plays like the song. It's amazing, right? And I think that's how these are examples how you can be a support and how you enter this work. Yes. Right?
Absolutely.
And then Idre, I was impressed because he learned Haitian Creole so he could talk to the folks. Yes. Like that is how, to me, so that you're not just being a do-gooder, but you're somebody that does good. Right, because do-gooders always have to be in position to do for somebody. Never want to empower you, right, to do that because it's about them feeling good. And I think you all are not do-gooders, but you're out there doing good work, and that you're just good. As I say to Dr. Haynes all the time, you're just a good human being, right? The added plus that you're Christian and you're a prophet, but it's a core or just a good human being, right? That you see the humanity in all people. Yeah. And Christians in America do a good job of getting back just to the basics. And that's really seeing the human. When it says Jesus looked out on the people who were harassed and harried, and it said he had compassion on the people. Right? Yeah. It wasn't if you were this or that, right? And so I think we just forget the fundamentals of who Jesus is and how do we get to that right interpretation that can speak to those people. So thank you. I just thought it was important to talk about, the people who are out there doing the work. And we'll give the chance for people to know how they can support Fellowship Southwest, because I can, definitely feel good about saying you can give to Fellowship Southwest because the money goes to ministries. And I saw the ministries feeding, clothing, sheltering. And when I say shelter, like Pastor Navarro's shelter, I mean, it's like a dorm room. It's like you got a flat screen. I was like, oh, this is really nice. So because it's not just give because they're struggling, you just give them anything.
Right.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
Right.
these are just good examples we have to lift up.
Absolutely.
So people can know that exists. So now I want to shift to, because this is a part we also have to do. That's more the acts of compassion, acts of charity that we absolutely must do. But now let's talk about the structures that are allowing what we're seeing to happen. So let's just start with SB4. So people can understand what that means now that that's able to be implemented.
So you want me to go for it? you chime in if you hear something that you need to add. So SB4 is a law that just recently passed this last year that is that pretty much gives authorization to any kind of officer, like peace officers who are not trained, to ask you for your immigration status at any time, any reason that they desire to ask you for your immigration status. And it is to pretty much be able to find migrants or immigrants who are in this country unauthorized. So if you at that moment they believe, or at their discretion believe, that you are here undocumented and you can't prove that you are documented, they have the right to take you to jail. And then depending on the judge, they can determine whether or not you will be deported and taken directly to the border. And the judges and these officers have no training in immigration law or any of the processes when it has to do with immigration. And so you have people in our country, especially in Texas, who are here on deferred action, like dreamers, right?
Right.
Or people who have temporarily protected status, like some Haitians and other people have, who don't have a way to prove that they are in this country with authorization. They don't have a green card. They don't have a visa. They don't have anything to prove, yes, I could be here. And even though they have a deferred action for deportation, meaning they will not be deported because they're here for per se a certain kind of authorization to be able to stay in the country. But you also have people who are, they have the authorization to ask you, how did you come into the United States? And so if someone who has a green card says, well, I first came unauthorized, they have the permission to take them to jail and to deport them, even though they're already holders of green card, because they don't know the immigration process. They don't know where they are now. And therefore, because they learned that you came into this country unauthorized, they can deport you. And so for you to be able to come back into the United States is almost impossible. And if you try to attempt to come back in, then you will have felony charges put on you and not be allowed to come back into the United States. So it's really a law that's for people who have come into the country within 2 years of the law. But those officers and judges, they don't know that. They're not trained to be able to identify that. And who are you going to profile?
Right.
When it comes, who are you going to ask? Are you gonna ask a white man that looks like Steven?
Right.
How long he's been in this country, or how did he come? Or are you gonna ask a person of color, right?
Like a Haitian that looks like me.
Yes.
And so let me ask this, because this sounds a lot like stop and frisk to me. It does, right? In my opinion, it's just by its existence, it's automatically we know who that applies to. Yes. So now let's ask this question so people can understand this more fully. Is it just for the border towns?
Supposedly it is supposed to be for the border towns, but nothing in the law says that it's just for border towns or for a certain amount of miles within Texas and the Mexican border.
Stephen King, did you want to add to that? Because it sounds to me like if somebody wanted to,
Right. Then they could walk up to anybody and say,
yeah,
how did you cross? I think the more consequential big picture here, other than the law itself is bad,
yeah,
but what we have here is a conflict between the state of Texas and the federal government.
right,
It is making it a state law, a state crime to cross in illegally. It's already an immigration violation, but it's trying to take the state's trying to take that into its hands. Which is the problem and the conflict. And, in some of these cases, it's almost like blackmail by deportation. Hey, you've got these state charges pending against you, but we'll drop them if you just leave. Right. And that's kind of diabolical, especially when you think about someone who's probably in some other portion of the immigration process, but has gotten caught up. Could be anywhere in Texas. They did not limit it to just border counties, and gets charged with this offense. It's really it's a bad law. It fits into a bigger picture of the narrative of conflict, but also we haven't mentioned that what that does to break down any kind of trust that might be there between the immigrant community and law enforcement.
right.
There was a lot there. You can find lots of voices from law enforcement against this bill because to keep a community safe, they have to have at least some level of trust that if a crime's committed, they can go speak to an officer, right?
Right.
And if they don't ever want to interface with the officer, that's detrimental to the safety of a community.
Right. Exactly. And so I'm asking this next question, which is and the reason I'm asking these specific questions because I need particularly Black folks to understand why we need to be concerned. Because if I just happen to be maybe four of us are riding in a car going around, we could look like anybody from Central America or from Haiti or from Nigeria or from Ghana.
That's right.
You know what I mean? So we understand the implications of that could possibly impact any of us who look this way, right? So let's talk about, so we got SB4 is one of the things we wanted to talk about. And then Operation Lone Star.
Right.
Do you want to?
You want to
Yeah, I'll
tell us
jump
about
on that.
Operation Lone Star?
It's simple and massive, but it is these states' effort to militarize the border, and it's there's multiple ways that we've now got the Texas National Guard and DPS and barriers and razor wire and buoys with razor wire. It is an effort to really militarize the border.
Yeah.
And what I think here's what I think most folks don't understand and why this effort is is not providing what they hope it's going to provide. It's not going to solve the problem. And actually it's very counterintuitive in that, first of all, if the only way you're going to stop somebody fleeing for their life is to become more inhumane than the cartel they're fleeing. And I don't think a lot of Americans want that, but that's what it looks like the governor is trying to do. And second, by doing so, these fortifications, these militarization, it's not stopping people from coming, but it is enriching the cartels. Because the harder you make it, the more likely these desperate folks are going to have to go to specialized people, cartels, coyotes, who understand how to get around these things. And so the very folks who want to be the hardest on the cartel, their policies are enriching them.
Yes. Yeah.
Whether it's Operation Lone Star and fortifications and walls, or it is remain in place, the type of policies that the previous administration put in, migrant protection protocols, PPP, MPP, and Title 42, they just want people to stop coming. What they're doing is just stacking up people on the other side of the border and enriching the cartels who prey upon them. And so what I would say to anybody who wants to build a wall or fortification is, if you knew doing that was going to empower, enrich the cartel, wouldn't you try a different strategy?
Yeah, and let's talk about that. That's what'd you say, Cheryl? Yeah. Well, yeah. So one of the things I didn't know this either. We went to when we did our Rio Grande Valley. No, where were we? Where did we?
Well, we were in the Rio Grande Valley.
We were okay, and we took the boat.
We took a boat ride on the river. Yes.
Yeah. So when we saw but I think it was Stephen or you. Maybe it must have been Stephen because I was in the car with Stephen. So when people think about the border, so you're like, well, the wall is actually like on the U.S. side, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
the real border, like you're in. To talk about the river, right? 'Cause that was kind of an
Yeah.
educational thing, just so people can kind of wrap their mind around when we say borders. What are we? Well, I always talk about a God of no borders because
Right.
God didn't have borders, right? These are man-made, and anyway, but that's another episode. But yes,
Well,
Stephen.
I'll talk about that. I also want to say that the media rhetoric is so outlandish.
Yes.
When you hear talks of invasion,
Right.
right? I mean, that
You'll
is
see.
militaristic language, and yet we're on a pontoon boat cruising down the river,
Right.
watching turtles. Like this
Yes.
is not
Right.
an invasion. Like I mean,
Right.
this ain't D-Day, right?
Right.
There's issues. There's not saying there's not, but
It's not an
um,
invasion.
it is not an invasion.
Right.
The second thing is the international boundary is right down the middle of the Rio Grande River, which of course you're not going to put a wall in the middle of the river. So that means you have to put it on the US side. But a lot of times there's floodplains, so you can't put it right there next to it. And so then you got to put it on a levee or further back. And what the government has done is take land.
Yeah.
US land, farmers' land, ranchers' land,
Right.
in order to build this wall. And we're not, and that's been problematic for a lot of folks. But we're not even talking about the environmental and ecological impact of what a wall does in an
Yes.
ecosystem.
That's right.
And so it's not to mention it does what I said earlier. Like it's just counterintuitive. It just drives people to cartels, people who know how to get around it. And just factually, like that's not the most powerful deterrent we have. That's not the most powerful security we have. They've got blimps, they've got drones, they've got infrared cameras, they've got cell phone detection. The wall makes no sense for a lot of reasons.
Right. Right. Did you want to add anything to that, Anyra?
No, I didn't. Maybe just that the wall is just a visual comfort for those who hear this rhetoric.
That's right.
But it doesn't do much. My sister, who is a social work student in El Paso and works in a county hospital, they receive cases every day of people who have tried to go over the wall,
Yeah.
whose legs are broken, who are facing life situations. So, if the Darien Gap, if the cartels is not going to stop them,
Right.
a wall is not going to stop.
Right. Right. Well,
That's a good slogan.
well, I'm gonna end this segment because I want to finally get to what I normally don't get to because everything is so good. But per usual, we always like, we have to do another part. You all have to come back, but we want to at least thank you for being here with us today. It's been very informative. I think we have to continue to have this conversation so another narrative is out there.
Yes.
So people are not just dependent on the mainstream media or particular faith communities giving a spin on what's happening at the border. So thank you,
Absolutely.
Stephen. Thank you, Anyra, for being here.
Well,
Thank you so much.
Honestly, thank you. It's a real honor to be with you, Danielle, on your show, to be your guest. And I just want to say how much I appreciate you and Dr. Haynes and Friendship West. You have taught me a lot over the decade plus we've been doing this work together. And so it's great to be on the podcast. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for being here.
And
So
thank you for sharing. Thank you for this opportunity to share about the lives of those who are on the border. Because their lives
Absolutely.
are important.
That's right.
And we need to be able to humanize them.
That's right.
And to say these are our siblings in Christ.
That's right.
And we're not supposed to ask. Nowhere did the Samaritan ever ask the person who was hurt if they had papers or if they
Right.
qualified for help.
That's right.
Simply helped.
That's right. That's right. Thank you for that. So I want to give us a little space, right? Because we have the work we do is heavy, right? It's heavy. We have to have all these practices to keep ourselves sane, all what we see and hear, right? And so I know you all have to have the time to. What is it? What do you do? Or what is it about your life? What do you do? Where you feel like, oh, I'm just in a good place. This brings me joy. I probably know what you're gonna say, Anyra. So let's go. Like, what do you do, like, to just unwind, to just get away from it all, and what brings you the most joy in life?
Well, I know what you thought what I was going to say, which is my daughter. My daughter, she's about to be 4 years old. She brings me the most joy. Just the other day, I took a picture of her, and, it makes me think of, just her smile brings me joy and connects me to God in ways that I don't think I would have ever experienced before. But that was cute. But also, I will also say is the community that I live among, which is the immigrant community. When the SB4 was enacted for like 4 hours, I was freaking out for them. And even though they were scared, they are scared, the hope that they hold brings me joy and comfort. It's like, wait, how can you have more hope than I can? But when I'm not in, well, my personal self is not in danger. I'm in danger from my community's in danger. But they bring me hope. And they bring me joy.
And we have a beautiful guest with us today that you brought with you. You want to tell us who you have with us today?
Yes, today I have my mother-in-law, who is Reverend Sofia Rodriguez from Barranquilla, Colombia. My mother-in-law was one of the first ordained women in the city of Barranquilla, a Baptist. I should say Baptist ordained. And so she's been working in her community, which is a very vulnerable and marginalized community of Colombia. And she's one of the people that inspires me in the work that she does and has never given up.
Let's give it up for Mother-in-law being here today. Yes, we had to make sure we spoke her name.
Thank you.
In the space. Stephen.
Yeah, similarly, I have three young kids. Daughter's 9 and two boys, 7 and 5. And so after a hard day, I'm often in the front yard throwing the baseball with the boys, or sometimes I grab the guitar and play a little bit and sing with my daughter. That's pretty fun. And then I'm an outdoors kind of guy. I like to go fishing. If I had to really kind of recenter myself, if I can go fly fishing and get out in nature and think about nothing but that which is in front of me, a river, and that sort of thing, that really does recharge for sure.
Nice. Well, we certainly pray God's choices, blessings on your individual lives, but also the work of Fellowship Southwest. You're doing great work that is very much needed. Of course, however we can continue to support, we will definitely do that. So thank you for tuning in for another amazing episode of Fannie Lou's Classroom. You can always support us by purchasing your T-shirt. If you're watching online, you can scan the QR code. If you're on your phone, you can go to friendshipwest.org/justice, and you'll see a form to purchase your Fannie Lou Classroom T-shirt. And we'll keep it rolling next week with our, again, another great guest coming to us, Dr. Fallon Wilson. We're going to have a conversation around the ways in which we begin to see technology not just something to consume, but something we use for job creation, and how we can better make sure we are equipped to keep up with the fast-changing technology, not be afraid of ChatGPT, not be afraid of AI, but also how we can also encourage our young people to really be engaged in STEAM, so we can make sure that we are in those spaces to make sure technology is advancing and developing. That also includes us. Cheryl is pointing to me to do something. Yes, thank you. That's important. So join us next week at 12 o'clock noon for that. And then Cheryl just reminded me of something very important. Stephen and Anyra, either one of you, tell the folks how they can support the work of Fellowship Southwest, because that in turn will definitely help support all the work that you do at the border.
Go for it, Stephen. And if you don't say something I want you to say, I'll say it.
Okay. All right. You do it. So pretty simply, go to fellowshipsouthwest.org. You can find a lot of ways to connect. Obviously, you can give there. We do have a fund that goes specifically to the border called the Knox Fund for Immigrant Relief, and 100% of all those funds go right to these partners we've talked about. We're pretty good as communication, so you can sign up for an email newsletter and follow us on social media for sure.
Also, another way that you can support Fellowship Southwest is connecting with us, and that's through several of our events that we'll have throughout the year. September 21st and 22nd, we'll have a conference called the Compassion and Justice Conference in Dallas. It'll be at Life in Deep Ellum.
Okay.
It's a great way for you to connect with other partners, with other people doing similar work, and to understand. And we're going to have keynotes of people who care about these issues, especially immigration, hunger, racial justice, and indigenous communities. And so in order for us to be able to know how do we connect to Fellowship Southwest, who is Fellowship Southwest, I think it's a great opportunity for you to come and join us and get to learn about us, but then also to be able to say, wait, how do I partner? Now, this is how I know I can partner with Fellowship Southwest.
Yes.
So.
Well, thank you for that. We'll make sure we put in our description, we'll drop the link to your website so people can, connect with you there as well. And if you shoot us, I guess I think I know the Instagram, is it just Fellowship of Southwest?
Yes.
So we'll put that in there so people can connect with you and sign up for your newsletters.
Yes.
So once again, thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Anyra, for being here. We so appreciate you being here with us today. And we look forward to seeing you next week right here in Fannie Lou's Classroom at 12 o'clock noon.
Thank you so much.
Thank y'all.
From the church to the streets